Great, thank you everyone. It's really interesting to hear all these global perspectives. I'm local, I live about 15 minutes down the road, so I didn't have to travel as far as some of the folks, but great to hear and welcome everyone to Toronto. So at Mantle Developments, we're climate consultants and we help organizations and policymakers understand and reduce their embodied carbon. I've worked in this space for about 10 years in embodied carbon, 15 years in green buildings, and I've worked with the City of Toronto. I'll touch on the City of Toronto policy at the end, but have worked with the federal government in Canada and also with the Canada Green Building Council to develop the embodied carbon requirements that are part of our national zero carbon standard. Don't have time to get into all of those today, but we'll touch on a few at the end. But the main topic of today's talk will be the federal government's policy on green procurement and specifically on low carbon concrete. So just wanted to kind of set the stage for this policy. It kind of lives within this larger green procurement policy of the federal government called the Greening Government Strategy, which was launched in 2017 and updated in 2024. It applies to all government construction, so this doesn't apply to all construction in Canada. It's the construction that the federal government runs and for properties and infrastructure that it funds. It does also apply to all what we call our crown corporations or arm's length organizations of the federal government, like Canada Post or our National Rail, Via Rail, the National Broadcaster, CBC, the Bank of Canada, the LCBO, which is the alcohol selling organization. So all of these kind of quasi-government entities are under this policy. And it does have a whole list of green procurement topics, including leased facilities, water construction, waste, biodiversity. So it's a broad sustainability procurement mandate, but we'll be digging into the specific one, buy clean, low carbon construction. That's where the main policy here lives. Just to touch, before we get into that one, just to touch on some of the broader, the new construction and major retrofits is more around operational energy, but they do have some notes in there about net zero emissions as a goal for construction. And if you dig down into the definition of that, they do actually define this net zero emissions as also having a 30% reduction in embodied carbon. So this is kind of sprinkled throughout the policy. One thing that is relevant, I think, to the concrete industry specifically is there is also climate resilience requirements in these policies. So all these new construction projects are supposed to do a climate change risk assessment and understand climate risks and how the buildings and infrastructure can be more resilient. So concrete obviously is a key material for building resilience. So to dig into the specific real property by clean construction here, basically, when this launched in 2017, the first bullet was the active one, which was basically to disclose the embodied carbon in the buildings and infrastructure. So it was just a reporting mandate. So folks had to understand the carbon footprint of their projects and report it. But now there was the bottom two bullets came into effect in 2025. So these are new, but you can see the one highlighted in red here is basically saying that these construction projects should have a 30% reduction in their embodied carbon. So project teams are responsible for kind of creating a baseline of what a typical project, using industry average materials, what the carbon footprint would be of that, and then making sure that they actually have lower carbon procurement and design strategies to reduce the embodied carbon by about 30%. So that's the general overarching policy, but we have a more specific standard that has been developed to help achieve that, which is called the Standard on Embodied Carbon in Construction. This came into effect at the start of 2023, and it basically requires project teams, again, under all federal government construction projects, buildings and infrastructure, to disclose and reduce the embodied carbon of construction projects. And the main meat of the requirement is here on this final line. It's basically you need to show that your project is 10% less, and actually it's only applicable to ready-mix concrete at the moment. So the summary of the policy is your ready-mix concrete on the project has to be 10% below the industry average benchmark. So to do this, you're supposed to provide EPDs, so environmental product declarations to show the carbon of your actual mixes used on the project, and then demonstrate that that's 10% below a baseline. So this is what the policy looks like. You can just Google it and it'll pop up on the web. One of the interesting things to point out here is that the appendix is where the specifics live in terms of what materials are covered and the percentage reduction requirements. And they did this very specifically because it's very easy for them to update appendices. It's very difficult from a policy perspective to update an entire policy. So they did this on purpose so that they could add more materials easily by just updating the appendix. So this was designed from the start to be to in the future have many different materials in it, but currently we're only at ready-mix concrete. So we're expecting to see many evolutions of this over time. So just some of the key things to point out here. It applies to all projects that are over $5 million. So it initially, before 2025, it applied to all projects over $10 million. So they started at the more expensive projects, and now they've ratcheted it down to $5 million and up. So they're it's applying to more projects over time. And then also, the project has to have at least 100 cubic meters of ready-mix concrete on the project. So if it has less than that, then the policy doesn't apply again. And as I said, additional materials are expected to be added in the future. We're expecting structural steel to be the next one. The government has undergone extensive industry collaboration and information gathering about adding steel to the project or to the standard. So we know quite a lot of engagement has gone on around steel. So it's no secret that steel's coming. We just don't know exactly when that's going to be implemented. We currently have tariffs on the steel industry in Canada, so they might not be wanting to go quickly in adding additional requirements on the industry, but I think hopefully when the trade gets back to normal, they'll probably be implementing those requirements. And then probably we should expect to see other forms of concrete, like precast, to be added. Unclear when that might happen. So when I talk to other industries and precast developers, I always say, as a future-proofing strategy, you should be getting ahead of this policy and basically making sure that your product is at least 10% below the industry average, right? Because that's what this current policy requires. So even if this isn't required for you right now, if it comes into place and you're above the 10%, then you're going to have to find ways to decarbonize pretty quick. So I think that's a good future-proofing approach to do before the policy comes in. Some of the other important or interesting fine print things I think to point out is they do actually have a note that if there's a special application requirement of concrete, they say high early strength, high or ultra high performance, or cold weather applications. Those are their kind of like specialty applications. They say in those cases you can actually increase your benchmark to 130%, so a 30% increase from the baseline. So they're allowing a higher carbon footprint for those specialty mixes. They also do have some language that allows projects to kind of not have to follow the standard if it's a specialty project. So they say if the performance of the structure or structural material hinders the implementation of the requirement or the reduction, the material doesn't have to be, or if the material is not available in a given region, then the project doesn't have to apply or doesn't have to comply with this. And then also the construction in the far north of Canada, in Yukon, Nunavut, and Northwest Territories are not required to follow the standard because they were concerned that there may not be cost-effective sources of low-carbon concrete. So that's some of the fine print associated with the policy. And so this is how you comply with the policy, basically, is in Canada, each of our provinces have a industry average ready-mix EPD. So this is the one from Concrete Ontario. This is the one that would be applicable for any construction across Ontario. And they basically have something like 20 different of these tables. I know you can't read it here, but this table in the title up there, it says 25 MPa concrete. So this is one strength class of ready-mix concrete, and each of the columns are different material ingredients to achieve that 20 or 25 MPa. So if you were to go through the different columns, it's varying between Portland cement and Portland limestone cement, and also varying the amount of SCMs. So some of them will say, 0 slags, the next column will say 15% slag, the next one will be 40% slag. And then the rows are the different environmental impacts that you would find in a typical EPD. So the top line is GWP, global warming potential. So this table basically you can flip, or this EPD you flip to your table of the strength class you need, and then the first red column there, the shaded red one, that's the baseline. So this is the typical industry average global warming potential of a 20 MPa mix, and then you can go across and look at how, by varying the ingredients, you can get a lower carbon mix. But that gives you, it's a very useful approach because it gives you the baseline. That's what you use to calculate, what your number you're trying to beat is, and then you can see how low your carbon footprint could achieve by switching to Portland limestone cement and switching to a higher amount of SCMs. So this is this gives you your baseline, and then on the left side of or on the right side of the slide there, that is what I would use to say, what am I actually using on my project? So this is a facility-specific EPD from Lafarge, one of our local suppliers, and so the GWP in the baseline here is 254. The one in my actual mix I'm ordering from my supplier is 130, right? So 130 is 48% below 254, so I'm 48% below the baseline by buying this mix, which obviously is better than the 10% requirement that I need to meet. So this is basically how you show that you're meeting the policy here. And again, we have a separate EPD for every province in Canada. So this was developed in combination with the Canadian National Research Council, and the concrete industry in all of the various provinces. So this is kind of the key enabling data that allows this policy to be effectively implemented. There are some other supporting documentation that was also developed when this policy came into effect a few years ago. This was kind of a primer on low carbon concrete, kind of demystifying, what it is, what do we mean by low carbon concrete, some easy strategies to reduce your carbon footprint, again, using, GUL, using higher SCM. So this is available online for anyone that wants to check it out. And then also we had some really good industry-driven support documentation. This is from Concrete Ontario, where they created this guideline on how to actually specify low-carbon concrete for specific projects. So these documents were really made for a broad audience, for non-technical audience, for procurement agents and policymakers to really understand and demystify what we're talking about when we say low-carbon concrete. Wanted to also just share this, close with this image in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. And some folks talked about carbon storage and concrete. I think that is kind of the holy grail future where we want to go if and when we can in the future. That using our buildings and our construction projects not just to be less bad, but to be one of the solutions to climate change, a sink for the carbon. I think that's really where we need to go. But maybe, I think I probably have a couple minutes left, so I don't have slides on this, but I'll just share a little bit about the City of Toronto's embodied carbon policy. Or before I talk about that, maybe I'll mention the building code in Canada, because all of this that I talked about, it's not for all construction in Canada, it's just for the federal government's construction, but we do have a plan to implement embodied carbon into the general building code for 2030, so it's a ways down the road still. But the plan is for operational carbon to be added to the building code in 2025 code cycle this year, but it'll probably take a few years to come into effect, and then embodied carbon in 2030. So that is on the radar for eventually getting into the, for all construction in the building code. In terms of the City of Toronto, we have a policy here called the Toronto Green Standard, which you need to meet in order to get a site plan approval to build. And it has an embodied carbon requirement at the building level, so not at the concrete mix level like this policy, but at the entire building. So you have to quantify the embodied carbon of your structure and envelope, and you basically divide it by your square footage. And if that number is above 350 kilograms of CO2 per meter squared, you don't get a site plan approval and you can't build. So it's currently a voluntary tier 2 requirement for non-city buildings. So if the city of Toronto is building something, it has to meet that 350 threshold already. But general construction, it's a voluntary stretch code or stretch target right now. And if you do that, then you get a financial incentive back. So there's a financial kickback if you achieve that. But that is expected to move from this voluntary to a requirement next year in 2026. So anyone that wants to learn more about that, for me, you can reach out and I can send you more details. But that was the first policy in North America to limit the carbon footprint of construction materials from a municipality. So that's a great leading example. And then the last thing I'll just quickly touch on is LEED. Anyone that knows about the LEED Green Building Rating System, it's a voluntary third-party rating system that many developers around the world, including big banks and organizations, target to make sure that their buildings are, best in class from a sustainability point of view. And they actually just adopted the newer version of LEED, V5. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. It was just ratified. And the exciting thing about that is V5 is the first one that embodied carbon assessments and reporting is requirement. So up until now, the previous versions of LEED only had embodied carbon as an optional credit that you could just ignore if you wanted to and focus on other parts of LEED. That's no longer the case. Every LEED project as of in a few months when this new one gets implemented will require to be reporting their embodied carbon. So we're definitely seeing this as growing in the industry and becoming more and more prevalent in construction going forward. So I think I'll end it there, but looking forward to the discussion after. Thank you.